Welcome back to Competitive Pokémon Explained, the series where I try to explain certain aspects of Smogon and VGC that might not be so obvious to newer spectators and players. Today we are going to be looking at playing the lower tiers of Smogon. This video will also coincide with another video that I made, looking at playing the older generations of Smogon. So subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get into it. Before we begin though, huge shout out to C-Spice for giving me some resources on this video. I'm not a huge player in the lower tier community, and I didn't have a whole lot of insight going into it, so without them, this video would not be possible. I'll also leave a few links in the description, just in case you're curious about the lower tiers. It's pretty interesting stuff. Alright, let's get into it. If you need a refresher on what the tiers are in Smogon, I highly suggest you watch the first episode of this series, as I explain what tiers are in Smogon. However, to refresh the crowd that has seen the video, when I refer to Pokemon in lower tiers, these Pokemon are, in one way or another, less used and more popular and stronger picks. Today's video will exclusively be talking about the tiers below RU, as those are what I consider the lower tiers. So, for clarity's sake, we will talk about NU, PU, and ZU across all generations. Also, I know there's another ranking system for Generation 1 singles called Pokemon Perfect, with tiers below its equivalent to Smogon's NU. We won't be touching that, as Big Yellow already did quite a few videos covering that topic, and Smogon is relevant across all generations. NU, PU, and ZU are much lower in power level than your standard OU mods, which is fair. However, this means that generally speaking, I don't think you'll see a whole lot of super powerful attacks being thrown around. Now don't get me wrong, you will see Fire Blast and Hydro Pumps and those high base power moves. However, oftentimes the stats of the Pokemon down here are not as high as their contemporaries. For example, one of the strongest Psychic types in never used RBY is Execute. And the only other Psychic type that is really in the tier, and not just a lower tier Pokemon with niches in the tier, is Mr. Mime. Hopefully that should give you a strong indication on what the power level is down here. If that wasn't enough, the strongest Psychic in the tier against a Clefable, arguably one of the most powerful Pokemon in the tier, is Abraz, who isn't even guaranteed to 3-hit KO. Heck, against Wigglytuff, who has one of the worst special stats in the tier, it still isn't guaranteed to 3-hit KO, where Wigglytuff's Hyper Beam can just instantly OHKO Abra. I mean, granted, Abra doesn't have the best physical defense stat in the world, but you would think that Psychic would do more damage, right? So yeah, the power level here is a bit on the lower end, especially compared to OU. However, that's the great thing about these tiers, is that Pokemon of a power level lower than OU can thrive in a competitive environment. And this is something that I see trips up a lot of newer players. They think they shouldn't play lower tiers because they want to win, and the most powerful Pokemon are in the higher tiers. But the reason why these lower tier formats exist is that any Pokemon, no matter how weak, can actually compete with other Pokemon of that same power level. But anyways, back to how to play these lower tiers. The most important thing to find out is what Pokemon you can use, as lower tiers ban Pokemon of higher tiers, and for good reason. Also, I generally suggest finding a viability ranking on the Smogon forums to see which Pokemon are good in the tier, as much like other tiers, there are still certain Pokemon that can do better against the rest. For example, RBY NU shows Clefable and Mr. Mime being the top dogs, with Blastoise, Charizard, and Venomoth not far behind. And often, the metagame centers around these more viable Pokemon, as you see a lot of sample teams for RBY NU utilizing these 5 Pokemon. So seeing these viability rankings is a good starting place in building a team. If you do really need help building a team, check out my video on that. But broadly speaking, I'd recommend starting up with the sample teams, especially for generations and or tiers you aren't quite familiar with yet. They exist for a reason, to help newer players find teams that help them do well. And if you do need more help, I would recommend going on the Smogon forums and either search for your question or ask your question there if you haven't found anyone else asking it. There are a lot of low tier enthusiasts that would be willing to help you out there. Okay, so you got your team. Now what? Much like OU, you can queue up into lower tiers for any generation. However, I would like to note that while there is a large community for these lower tiers, it probably won't be as popular as Random Battles or OU for example. So if you run into longer queue times, then that's why. Just be patient, and once you're in the match, congratulations, you're playing your first low tier match. Game mechanics themselves are unchanged from standard play, though you might see some rule changes here and there from OU. Overall though, the way you play at NU is the same as any other tier you play, the Pokemon and rules just might be different. And that's how you get into the lower tiers of Smogon. I highly recommend anyone to give low tiers a try, as who knows, maybe you might like it enough to become a full-fledged enthusiast. The community would love to have you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, huge thanks to Steve Spice for help on this video. If you like what you see, I'd suggest subscribing to see more content like this. Comment down below what your favorite low tier Pokemon is and ask any questions down below as well. And with that, I will see you all next time. Okay, so I used the same format as the last guide. I know I'm gonna get a few comments asking why the scripts for this and the old generations video sound so similar. And it's for good reason. Both guides are going to be in the same structure anyway, and both of these videos are going to be pretty short. So I wanted to keep the scripts the same. I also just gave the same advice for playing either one, either way. I also kind of thought it would be funny to have like the two videos be like similar enough, but like somewhat different, kind of like Pokemon is with its games. If you got a kick out of this concept, I did my job correctly. If you heard this message, subscribe. Click that notification bell. Yeah, I'm all out of time, so I'll see you all in the next one.